Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nine Show podcast. As always, it's Josue. And regardless of the fact that I made that little promise segment 2 weeks ago, I wasn't able to deliver. Basically, finals had gotten in the way, and it was getting really hard to actually find the time to sit down and actually record this episode. But, it's been in the works for a while. It gave me a little bit more time to actually fully research and find out a lot of really interesting things that I didn't think I was actually going to find about the number nine, and, finding out that it's so linked to just so many subjects across life and history and culture in general. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and start by giving a shout out to our friends over at the Grind for Growth podcast. Go ahead and give them a like and subscribe to them on iTunes. There are a couple of younger high school age guys that have come together and have created a podcast that's made up of little sort of like 15 to 20 minute segments about finding motivation and about proverbs that speak about reaching your milestones and your goals. And, like their title is, they're all about finding the motivation to get in that grind of life where you can actually grow as a person, no matter in what field you're looking to do so, whether it's professional and personal and just any sort of aspiration you have. So go ahead and give them some love. And guys, if you're listening, good job at what you've done and keep it up. So now jumping into our main content here, I just kind of want to start off and kind of say that I have mentioned it before on other episodes, but the number 9 does appear 3 times in sequence in my birth date. So I was kind of fascinated by that. It could easily happen with any other number, but it was just because of that, I always considered it my lucky number. And going back to the first time I even played scratch tickets, because I'm a little bit of a gambler and nothing too compulsive, nothing too addictive, but I like to play. I like to bet every now and then. And I started off doing Scratch, and the first time I won on Scratch, it was with the Pac-Man Scratch game. Now, in the states where it seems to be the majority of my listeners are, which would be Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and actually, surprisingly enough, outside of the United States, there seems to be some listeners over in Japan. So, shout out to all the fans of the Nine Show podcast in Japan. Konnichiwa. Hope you guys are doing well. Seems like that game is not available in other places. 'Cause I remember I tried looking for it in California once, and I couldn't find it even when I went to there's this Emporium, I guess. It's on the border of Nevada and California when you're driving into Vegas about 40 minutes before, which is the town of State Line or Prim, as I think it's officially called. Just before that, there's that little gambling emporium, and then they have essentially any scratch game that you can play, but there wasn't there, so I would think that it's maybe not available in those states. But anyways, in Washington, the odds of winning any scratch game are 1 in 3, and as a lot of people know, 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 plus 3 is 9, and 9 is related very much to 3, and is very much surrounded by the idea of the trifecta, the trinity, and the trilogy, right? So I've never won any life-changing money on those types of games, but at the highest amount that I once won was like $80. So, and that's not the only time that I've won on that game. I think I've won maybe like 4 or 5 different times, and it's been in amounts kind of like that. It's been $40, $60, 80, 10, 15, 5. It's varied, but it's the majority of the time that I played that game, for whatever reason, it seems like I've had good luck and I've actually won. And I guess going deeper, the whole object of the game is you're given 3 chances to actually guide Pac-Man into like the right the right prize winning areas, just kind of like the normal game. Like you have to avoid the ghosts and pick up the power-ups and whatnot. But in a game that's revolving around 3 and by extension 9, it seems like I've had the majority of luck on those. So I would consider, in a way, lucky number 9 to be my lucky number. Being someone, I guess, of faith, it's kind of hard to say I do believe in luck per se. There's that quote where it's like, I mean, it doesn't apply to this because it doesn't take any hard work to play Scratch, but there's that quote that says the harder you work, the luckier you get, which, yeah, I think there is some truth to that. But as far as straight up luck, I don't know if it's something that can really be like articulated as like a physical force or whatnot. But there's days when you win and there's days when you don't, and there's times when you go on streaks. So it's just, yeah, I guess, quote unquote luck, revolving around that number. So yeah, in a way, lucky. Jumping into the idea of history and culture, multiple religions and faiths recognize the number nine as being holy and significant. And I didn't count on there being just so many different things and different connections to like different religions. But starting off with the Aztecs, my ancient ancestors, the roots of my heritage, I guess, so to speak, they had the idea of Mitolcan, which was essentially the name of their underworld, and that underworld had 9 levels. And the souls, I guess, the newly arrived souls to Mitolcan, as they arrived, they started on a journey between levels, or 9 levels, starting from 1 going up to 9. And 9 was recognized as being like the top. So it was essentially what you could call heaven or nirvana and anything of that similar concept. But that was considered to be the very top level, the ultimate goal. And essentially that's like where those souls, those lost souls, would find their rest at the end of their long journeys, the final rest, the ultimate peace. In terms of Indian Hindu philosophy, the idea of Ashitna, which is one of the great schools of Hindu philosophy and culture, it recognized there being 9 fundamental elements that made up the universe. And these were earth, water, air, fire, ether, time, space, soul, and mind. So that's kind of interesting to actually see that there was an entire school, entire like religious philosophy school that recognized there being 9 equal parts essentially to what made up life in the universe and what made up the fundamental core of what life was. Also within Indian Hindu philosophy, there was this celebration called Navaratri, which was essentially a 9-day festival that was dedicated to the 9 forms of Durga. And now Durga was actually was recognized as being a very popular Hindu goddess amongst the pantheon of Hindu gods, which is actually very expansive. That's actually its own, that could be a subject for its own episode, really, or even a couple episodes, because it's just one of the more interesting and diverse religious faiths, and just one of the most expansive. They have, I can't really quote a number, but there's a lot of, I guess, religious texts within Hinduism that are very important, and it's just a whole library of like sort of creation texts and sort of fundamentalist or fundamental texts that combine to create one of the more interesting, one of the most expansive religions and schools of philosophy just in the whole world. And continuing on within this realm, there's a concept within Hindu aesthetics, which are called rasas, and there are said to be 9 rasas. And in the Sanskrit, the word is pronounced Malayalam, and essentially what that means, it literally translates to juice or essence and taste, and essentially it connotes a concept in Indian arts about the aesthetic flavor of any visual, literary, or musical work that evokes an emotion or feeling in the reader or audience but cannot be described. It refers to the emotional flavors / essence crafted into the work by the writer and relished by a sensitive spectator or sahradaya, or one with positive taste in mind. So that's actually really interesting because it essentially understands this is that there's like 9 fundamental emotions. And reading about this and looking at images, essentially it wasn't necessarily divided equally like 3, 3, and 3 amongst, it was like happy, mad, and sad. But it essentially takes you, like if you were to watch a performance about, or a performance utilizing the Hindu aesthetic in the rasas, you would actually see, if you saw all 9, you would see like the full spectrum of emotions that people would go through. So that's really interesting that they, concluded that there were 9 versions, essentially 9 main versions of the 9 emotional flavors, in terms of what they're talking about, that someone who was a sensitive spectator, the sahradaya, they'd be able to perceive that, and that influence would be powerful, and it would kind of go on to influence that person, perhaps, like in the course of the day, or kind of like in the course of their activities. But it was something that was important enough to be denoted as there being 9 versions of those like fundamental emotions in these types of performances. And yeah, like I said, like the images, if you look up the 9 rasas and the aesthetics, it's kind of interesting because it's like, it's sort of overly exaggerated in a way, I guess, if you consider kind of more, like I guess a more laid back performance where you're used to seeing like on TV and such. It aligns more with like I guess what you would experience in the theater, but even more so than that. So it's pretty interesting actually. I'd recommend people to go read about it and kind of take in those images. It Some people might find that inspiring or just kind of interesting to read about. Jumping over to the Chinese philosophy, the number 9 is strongly associated with the idea of the dragon. And, as a lot of people know, the dragon is, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the national symbol in China, but it's something that's very important. It's very prevalent. You see it in a lot of different media, a lot of different legends, things that are represented through dragons. I mean, one thing that just comes to the top of my head is being one of China's like biggest exports, I guess if you can say, like in terms of acting, which was Bruce Lee, and then the illustrious career he had in his time. He was known as the Dragon. That was his middle name. It was Bruce the Dragon Lee. So that's something that can be seen very much in that culture as being a very important symbol. And then there are 9, or there's said to be 9 forms of the dragon. And it is described in terms of there being 9 attributes to each one, and each one also has 9 children. And there's a bit like of a mathematical equation of how like everything's broken down and deduced into 9. But essentially, it's said that the dragon has 117 scales, and what that is if you take 100, because there are 117 total scales minus 81 masculine scales. And then, that leaves you with 36 feminine scales, and altogether, that creates the whole. So that's the idea of the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, the order and the chaotic. And all 3 of those numbers are multiples of 9. And 9 times 13 equals 117. 9 times 9 equals 81. And 9 times 4 equals 36. And all of these also have the same digital root of 9. And like I was saying earlier with the culture, the dragon is often associated with the emperor. That's in his vestry and in the way that he was dressed, and is kind of represented in a lot of old texts, and as well as in like kind of movies that we have here in the West. You always see the emperor dressed like in the yellow emperor's suit, with very prominent drawings and representations of the great dragon. Jumping down to the Middle East, specifically the Kingdom of Egypt, ancient Egypt, there was an old carving of a Sphinx, Thutmose III, and essentially what it represents is the concept of the 9 bows. And what essentially this was that the 9 bows, each bow represented one of the greatest enemies of the Egyptian kingdom at any given time. So the Sphinx was represented as actually being, or having its paws over the 9 bows, kind of denoting the idea that no matter what kingdom Egypt would face, it was always going to be superior, and it was always going to win. It was always going to maintain its status in what they considered at the time to be the center of the world, kind of like the birthplace of everything. Considering what we actually read in the Bible, it's said that 9 has a really big spiritual significance, and it actually appears a lot of times, more than once. For example, when Jesus is nailed on the cross, it is said that he expired at the 9th hour. Jesus is also said to have appeared to his apostles 9 times after his resurrection. As specified by St. Paul, there are 9 spiritual gifts of God, which are wisdom, knowledge, faith, the gift of healing, the gift to operate miracles, prophecy, discreetness of spirits, tongues, and the ability to interpret them. Also, St. Paul listed 9 fruits of spirit, which are love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, trustfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The number 9 is also associated with Hoshea, the son of Elah, who became king of Israel in Samaria and ruled 9 years. Also, a very holy saying from Jesus ben Sirach, and a lot of people will know this, or know him by the Book of Sirach, which is one of the books in the Bible. And one of the holy sayings he's cited as have been written is there are 9 things that I can think of which strike me as happy, and a 10th one, which is now my tongue. And that one's pretty interesting. The way I understand that is that if there are 9 fundamental things that, strike up happiness and create happiness, the 10th one is essentially just the execution of the 9. or an execution of one of those nine. So that's kind of interesting to kind of consider that that's that's the nine kind of split up, and that's what's being created. That's like the spice of life, I guess. And the 10th is just acting upon the nine principles. And jumping into sociology, numerology, astrological studies, and people studies, as I've seen it been said too, we have the concept of numerological personalities. And actually, there's supposed to be nine of these. And what I thought was interesting as I was reading is that I guess the ninth personality type is supposed to be like the most controversial one. Um, it's said, I guess, that people often like, I guess this is whoever is considered to be a nine personality, which there's conflicting like ways that you calculate it. Apparently it's like some math equation based off like your birth date, and then there's other things that are kind of more like it's kind of related to your star sign, like certain star signs align to certain numbers. So I wasn't able to find a clear like indication of how you find out which one you are. I guess that's because of the fact that, I mean, I know some people believe in this, so I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I mean, a lot of people do kind of consider it a pseudoscience. Um, and you know, I I think there's some pretty awesome coincidences that sometimes like these things predict, and then you find out that you're one of these star signs or one of these number personalities, and you're like, hey, actually that just kind of sound like me, or that sounds like people, how people describe you, or and which, yeah, that does happen a lot. But that being said, it's said that the ninth personality type is supposed to be really polarizing, so people often decide whether they hate or love this person right away. And they'll make that decision even sometimes as soon as they walk in a room. I guess like the ninth personality type, when they walk in the room, like everyone notices, and it's either a negative reaction to it or a positive reaction. They're said to be really interesting, intelligent, and confident. It is said though that they're supposed to be really prone to arrogance if they're not careful. And even if they're not necessarily arrogant, their actions are very easily perceived as arrogant, although a lot of times this is not that person's intention. Also, it's said that this person can become very self-absorbed if not careful. But either way, many people are drawn to this person. Now, whether that person uses that for a negative intention or a positive intention, I guess that's really up to them. But either way, this person seems to draw large groups of people to either become famous or infamous, which is something that's pretty interesting. And to go along with that, actually, the movie titled Nine from 2009, directed by Shane Acker, produced by Tim Burton, actually has, and I never knew about this actually until researching for this episode, that actually has to deal a lot with this concept. And actually, I'm thinking that I'm going to actually probably, because like I did state originally that every season finale, every ninth episode of every season, I want it to be related to the number nine somehow it has to lead back into it to kind of maintain the theme of the Nine Show podcast. And I think I want to do this. I mean, it's really early on, obviously, but I think I want to do this as the season finale for season 2, go over the 9, because I guess without going too deep into it now, essentially, like, if you guys know the plot of the movie, a little bit of spoiler alert here, but the main scientist, essentially splits his soul into 9 different versions of himself, and each of the 9 dolls represents a part of his personality. So that kind of fits in with these. And apparently they studied this science, this subject pretty deeply, and they actually identified each of the characters in the way they speak, even down to the people they cast. Actually, like, they were trying to align real close to like how these someone of that category would actually behave in real life. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But transitioning into like more what I call celestial numerology, and these next parts are gonna get a little bit deep. I'm not gonna lie, like these took a long time to actually research and find a way that they made sense in a concise way. But essentially, one sentiment that I'd like to introduce this part of the subject with is that there's a big central idea that concepts and patterns that numbers seem to follow don't exist by chance, and that's because they imitate patterns that exist in nature already. I mean, one example that I can think off the top of my head is, which I've seen cited, is the Fibonacci sequence. And apparently, the Fibonacci sequence can actually be seen in the formations of certain plants and stuff. And like, actually, if you were to deduce like a picture of like how the Fibonacci sequence looks and the patterns that it follow, like, it actually, you'd see the formations of certain plant life and stuff actually follow those same like spiral like shapes. So apparently this is something that's actually not acknowledged often, which I would agree. You never really hear because it seems like as a larger theme that things like religion, science, nature, they all seem to be kept separate. But it seems to be that if you really look into things deeper, things connect and are actually a lot more related than you would think. Which that's a interesting thought, I think, to put that together and realize that nothing is by mistake in reality. That's something I truly believe in. Whatever we've created is sort of an imitation, or not imitation, but it's sort of it's a reproduction of the understanding of things that already exist. We haven't been able to connect that tissue yet, I guess. And the main part of this, one of this last sections here that I'm going to be referencing really heavily is there's a book that was written back in 1889, and it was called The Light of Egypt. It was written by Thomas H. Burgoyne. And I'm referencing this video by a creator on YouTube called Mr. Ryan McMahon. Go ahead and give him a like and subscribe. He breaks it down a lot better than I'm going to be able to break it down here. And he even acknowledges, though, in the fact that it's so deep. It's so esoteric in a way. Like, it's kind of hard to define exactly what's going on here. But I try to understand it the very best I could. So that way I can give it to you guys in a more ingestible manner. But he'll definitely be able to break it down a lot better than I can. So go give him a watch if you are more interested in this part specifically. But essentially, to give some background, this guy, Thomas H. Burgoyne, he was part of a group called the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. If you translate directly from the French, it's actually fraternity, which a lot of people actually don't know, that the word fraternity, like the college fraternity, essentially means circle of brothers. So brotherhood is, easily understood as fraternity, but essentially, there's a little snippet of info. And it was considered a Rosicrucian occultist group. Now, a lot of times when people hear the word occult, like, people get all scared because it's like, as soon as you hear occult, you're like, oh, it's Satanist. And that's not wrong 100%. A lot of times, yeah, occult stuff is related to Satanism and devil worship, but I guess the official definition of what occult is it identifies as something that's supernatural, mystical, it involves magical beliefs, practices, and phenomena. And and because of that, it's not Satanist per se. So it could be, mystical. I'll get more into this a little bit later, but I guess what you call mystical Christianity, which essentially that's what the Rosicrucian organization was described as being. It was described as being esoteric. It was mystical in origin, and it combined a couple different philosophies: Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, Hermeticism, theistic science, alchemy, astrology, theurgy, and alchemy, which was all a precursor to modern science. And it all combined in what they called mystical Christianity, which was essentially just kind of taking the more sort of the more esoteric and more, I guess, don't want to say fantasy, but just kind of like the more esoteric concepts that were within Christianity, and they separated and created their own groups, and that was considered a cult. But then again, that this specific group was not Satanist in origin. And then I just want to clarify that these are not a reflection of my own beliefs. I just thought this was really interesting and how it kind of served the point of the episode going into number 9, because it really holds it in like high regard, kind of stating that it's like one of the cores essentially of the universe. But getting back into the book, essentially it states that everything is a result of 3 trinities, in which ultimately can be reduced to one trinity, And again, ultimately from there is reduced to the idea of one being the centrality, I guess, like the main beginning, right? And now the first of these trilogies is said to be mind, substance, and motion, in which can be understood as intelligence, ether, or force. And all these together equal consciousness, or what is mentioned as the universal thought. So the way I understand this is the universal thought is essentially, I guess, the thought that gives mind, or the thought that is the central mind that gives or gave birth to everything as we understand it and recognize it. The second one of these is said to be I am, God is, and the universe exists. And these are described to be as all things being born of thought in reference to the fundamental truth of I am. Now, this was actually pretty interesting when I read it, because in the Bible verse, which speaks about when Moses was conversing with the burning bush, which held the spirit of God at the moment, when Moses asks, "Who are you?" the Holy Spirit answers, "I am that I am." So that kind of connects back into like this idea of I am being the central core of everything, essentially. And the third of the trilogies was considered to be life, change, and creation. And essentially, this boils down to the Hermetic statement of as above, so below. And then another way to understand this is God is within man, and man is the temple of God. And like I said, I'm giving a really shortened version of this because I honestly don't understand the ins and outs. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on hermetics and, you know, these esoteric beliefs and stuff. I would, like, again, I said I would encourage you guys to go do your own research, but I just thought it was really interesting how it was basically saying that life is three trinities, and obviously, you know, 3, 3, and 3 is 9, but 9 is essentially boiled down to 1, which is the core, and 9 is the core as well. So it's like it's viewed in a couple different lights, but it's like the three sets of three were make up, you know, the universal mind, the idea of God, and the idea of man, and how man is the temple of God and God is within man. So that's just a really interesting notion to me. And now closing out here, we're going to have a little bit of a lightning round. So I want to give a big shout out, a big credit to the channel Smart Banana, which I'm going to be referencing heavily in this section. The video is named the 37 Amazing Facts About the Number 9. So yeah, they're in the full video. When you guys will give them a watch, go ahead and please do that. They list a full 37 different facts about the number 9, just a lot of sort of like mathematic clues and just a lot of historical stuff. So I just went ahead and picked 9 of my favorites and the ones that I felt like I could actually break down a little bit more. So yeah, we're just going to jump right into it. We're going to go back or just go through them just in a lightning round style. And what was cool about this is that all of the facts here, all the numbers mentioned are reducible to 9. And I went ahead and listed that, how that actually happens. Yeah, so we're just going to go through that. I'll try to explain them as I go through them for the ones that I feel I can explain. If not, then, you know, I'll leave them. I'll let the work speak for itself, and you guys can go look into that yourself. But yeah, some of these are kind of interesting. You wouldn't think about how they do end up connecting all, but it's kind of weird. Yeah, it's real cool. So number 1, a person's normal respiration rate is 18 times per minute, and 18 divided by 2 equals 9, and 1 plus 8 also equals 9. Number 2, the average number of heartbeats per hour is 4,320. 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 0 equals 9. Number 3, in the Hindu tradition, the present cycle of time consists of 432,000 years. 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 9. Number 4, Icelandic tradition tells of a great warrior hall in which there was 540 doors, in which 800 divine warriors would pass through each. Now, 540 times 800 equals 432,000, in which the previous equation applies as well. Number 5, Catholic rosaries have 54 beads, and 5 plus 4 equals 9. Number 6, the numerological value of the word love is 54, and 5 plus 4 equals 9. Now, This one and what they're referring to is the alphanumerical value of numbers, and in which you can actually, or I mean of letters, I should say, and the letters in sequence LOVE, when you reduce them, uh, is 54, and 5 plus 4 equals 9. So that's sort of like that reduction, how yet it's still connected into 9. And this is going to come up again in these next ones. That would seem to denote the fact that 9 is related to the idea of love, how somehow it's the holy number, which we have referenced before. So there seems to be some sort of connection even across disciplines that are like not related. 9 is related to the word love in some way. Now, this one, it's like I was kind of doubtful at first, but go ahead and test it, and you'll see. No matter how you do it, you're gonna prove yourself correct after you hear this. But 9 plus any digit, when the result is reduced, returns the same digit. Now, a digit is anything that's 1 through 9. That's the considered digit. So, examples that I tested: 9 plus 7 equals 16. And if you go back and reduce that check, 6 plus 1 is 7. And another one, 9 plus 3 equals 12. And 1 plus 2 equals 3. So it always seems to work back, you'll get that digit when you do this reduction process. Number 8, the number 144 is a gematria number, and atria, it's a light reading. And then it actually kind of connects to the idea of hue. So it's like sort of the reading of the colors. Like if you can think of, rubies as being red, and jade as being green. It's like an atria number is assigned to that type of color, I guess, in the sense. It's the way I understand it. But the gem atria number 144, it's often connected to the concept of light. And as it turns out, 1 plus 4 plus 4 equals 9, right? So it's like 9 there again, considered related to the concept of light, and the concept of light and love is also related to the concept of God. So there's something here about the holiness, I guess, of the number. And then as the last one, this one's a little bit harder to ingest. It took me a couple of times to understand it and read it, but I'm gonna try to make it have as much sense as possible. But okay, the speed of light formula is E equals mc squared, right? If m and e are replaced with their reduced numerological equivalents, so for m that would be 4 and 3 for e, and then you go back and perform the function, the 9 result is 36, which reduces to 9. If the function is modified to e equals mc squared, the result is that e equals 144, which we have seen also reduces to 9, like in the concept of light. So essentially, it's like, it's not saying it literally, I guess, but you could draw a conclusion that it's saying that 144, connected to the gematria number of light, is saying that 9 is light. And yeah, there's just there's so many connections, and this was a really interesting episode to do, because one that I didn't actually include here, which was connects the idea of the concept of light and love and God, is that since 9 is connected to the word love and light, there was I'm gonna probably butcher it, but it was essentially like the phrase when you do that sort of reductions against with the alphanumerical values is like the phrase God dash 9 was, and then you take out the dashes, God 9 was saying essentially that 9 was the number of God, right? So I learned a lot about this number, and I hope that you guys actually were able to enjoy it, because this is probably the funnest one that I've done. And looking back, it's awesome for me, having done these full 9 episodes plus the Drive 5.5 extension makes 10. But after starting this journey in I think like late September, early October, we're finally here in March 2019, and the first season is now officially done, and that's that's real awesome. This is something, like I've said before, that I want to do for a while, and Just like that, here we go. And I want to thank everyone that's listened so far, that's subscribed, to the Podbean as a liker, who's left any comments and such, who's ingested any of the other content that I've been making, via the blog and on the personal website and the Patreon and all that. And, again, for anyone that wants to contribute, that'd be greatly appreciated. It'll help me to build and produce better and more frequent content for you guys. Again, this is all for you, and it helps me in this journey, that I've been going on, that I don't want to stop anytime soon. Like I said at the beginning, within the next 2 weeks, I want to have season 2, episode 1. So it still feels kind of foreign, but yeah, season 2, episode 1, which I want to kind of focus on the 80s, sort of like the 80s culture and how it's seemed to come back within the last couple of years. We've seen a lot of movies with that style, and sort of the idea of synthwave, synth pop kind of have returned in some more underground circles, some more mainstream, but there seems to have been a trend kind of going more towards that once again. And again, season 2 finale idea for the movie 9, directed by Shane Acker, produced by Tim Burton, with the idea of the 9 personalities that we touched here. I think that would be a really good episode to break down and talk about, because ever since I saw it first as a kid, I always thought it was really interesting, because it's definitely not it's not your typical animation. I'd almost say it's not really for kids. I guess for older kids, but it's real deep when you look into it. It's like you could really see Tim Burton like having produced it, because if you look at his other work, like Sleepy Hollow, all the classics, I guess, that he's done with Johnny Depp, Edward Scissorhands, Sweeney Todd, it kind of follows in that vein. Not nearly as violent, I guess. If you've seen Sweeney Todd, you know what I'm talking about. Like there isn't anyone that gets their throat cut, with a barber's razor or anything like that, but you could definitely see it's very much like The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is, that's also Tim Burton directing and writing. I think that's very much like in that vein, I guess. But yeah, guys, just thanks again for sticking through the first season, and coming up into season 2, we'll keep it going. We'll get you guys another 9 episodes, to come. I would think that season 2 is going to probably take us all the way into probably the summer 2019, within this next quarter, in the college system, within the next quarter, which all the way going to be until June. Plans besides, the season finale, I definitely want to get some interviews here. Varying people, varying disciplines, some friends, and just some other professional contacts that have expressed interest in coming on here and kind of talking about their work, what they do. Also, like just kind of just sitting around and messing around with the squad. We'll definitely like bring that on, because we can have some cool conversations. We all happen to be like in the same major and whatnot, so like. I'm pretty sure some stuff that we've talked about already might come up, and I think that will be something that you guys can enjoy. But yeah, that's definitely going to be coming. I'm going to definitely set that up, and more in updates as they arrive. I think that there's a possibility that this stuff will grow, and that's my hope. Like, it'll grow into more multimedia, kind of like I talked about in the special message. We'll be adding more like film components and stuff for the patrons, and I'll be writing more blog posts, and that will lead into more episodes. I did promise at the beginning to do more episodes about like lifestyle related stuff, which I haven't been so good about lately. I did write, for those of you guys who haven't seen, head over to the personal website and follow the WordPress link. You guys will see the article that I published about probably 2-3 weeks ago, going over fragrance and the idea of collecting fragrance, using fragrance, kind of getting into it, and then I give some recommendations about what you guys can start with if anyone's curious about that. yeah, so I definitely actually want to do an episode about cologne and fragrance specifically. So that's definitely probably gonna find its way into season 2 at some point, and just other lifestyle stuff, health related, fitness related, just kind of certain opinions and stuff that I've come across over the over the short years that I've actually had, but just interesting stuff that I think could probably be useful to some people that are just not aware. But yeah, guys, thanks again, and I hope everyone's doing well. Enjoy your spring break, and from me here at the Nine Podcast, I want to just send you guys good vibes, and once again, thank you, and signing out for now. Catch you again in about 2-3 weeks when season 2 episode 1's published, and yeah, take care. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening, and as a little treat, here are some bloopers that I've collected throughout season 1. It's turning out to be real hard. I'm actually gonna go ahead and read it again. Episode 1, part 1. Oh, okay. Episode 9, part 1, take 4. Room turn. Hey everyone, welcome back. Chinese philosophy, take 2. And jumping over into Chinese philosophy, Chinese philosophy, part 1, take 1. Jumping over into Chinese philosophy, the 9 is associated really strongly with the Chinese dragon, and the dragon in Chinese philosophy is a symbol of magic and power, and that's something that even here in the West we've actually come to kind of perceive, even if sometimes like the movies that we make about other cultures tend not to be done correctly, or they're very Hollywood. That's a theme that is very prevalent. I mean, even I guess one of China's most well-known and prolific exports, I guess, as far as actors that have come from over there. Bruce Lee, the great Bruce Lee, he was known as Bruce the Dragon Lee. So that's something that is a really strong, considered to be a really strong animal, a really strong symbol in their faith. And going along with that, there are said to be 9 forms of the dragon, and it is described in terms of 9 attributes, and there are 9 children, so there are 9 variations of that dragon. And going deeper than that, it actually is said to have 117 scales and 117 take 3. Sociology, numerology, take 3. And now jumping into what we can call sociology, numerology, astrological studies, even people studies, as I've kind of seen and represented before. We had the concept of the numerological. Take 5. And jumping into the subjects of sociology, numerology, astrological studies, and people studies, as I've seen it mentioned before too, we have the concept of the numerology. I can't say this word, guys. The Thomas H. Burgoyne, take 1 section. So then also, like, as a little disclaimer, these are not reflectant of my release, or